This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Parashat Vayikra and also Parashat HaChodesh. In this week's parasha, we begin Sefer Vayikra, which is the sefer that talks about the korbanot, the different sacrifices that were brought in the times of the Mishkan and in the times eventually of the Beit HaMikdash. And we have to stop and think about it. We have to say to ourselves, wait a second. The korbanot were applicable, probably expired around 2,000 years ago. Now, it's not really so relevant anymore. Why do we focus on it? Why are there so much of the parashiyot on it? As we know that the Midrash brings down that the young children start from Sefer Vayikra. That's what they begin from. And to this very day, there's a minhag that if they don't do the beginning, because it's a little bit dry for younger kids, at least they do the first few psukim of the Sefer to fulfill that beginning of Vayikra. And you ask yourself, well, all of this, and we're going to be reading this week, and we read next week, and the week after, a whole slew of parashot that are seemingly irrelevant, because sacrifices aren't brought today. But in truth, that's not the fact, and we are actually contradicted by what we say 3 times every single day. In the Tefillah, in the Shmona Esrei, we have a bracha, the bracha of Ritzeh. And in that bracha, we mention a phrase. We say, Ve'ishei Yisrael utfilatam, which means the Isheh is like the fire, the sacrifices of the Jews and their prayers, Me'era be'ava tekabir beratzon. You should accept lovingly. Now, I understand prayers, that makes sense. That the prayers should be accepted, that we're praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We want our tefillot to be answered. I get that. But the Ishei Yisrael, the sacrifices should be accepted. That implies that we're offering sacrifices, which we're not doing. How does that make any sense? Why do we pray every single day that our sacrifices should be accepted? What sacrifices? There are no sacrifices. And this question is asked by a few commentaries, the earliest of which is the Tosfot in Masechet Menachot, the very, very end of the Masechet. He brings up this issue, and the way to address it is through the Midrash. The Midrash writes, I'll read it inside, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us, to Am Yisrael, if I was actually seeking, if I actually needed your sacrifice, right? That's a typical secular question to be asked. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu need our sacrifices? Doesn't He have enough animals? Doesn't He have, isn't He God? Doesn't He not need any presents? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a response. He says, if I was seeking sacrifices, Lo hayiti omer leMichael shu etzli b'marom le'akriv li korban, would I have not commanded my angels that are in Shamayim, Michael, Sar Yisrael, the angel Michael, who was the minister of the Jews in Shamayim, would I have not just asked him to bring me far better korban, more spiritual, more holy? I would have asked my angels to do that for me. But I don't. Ha'eni mevakesh korban el Am Yisrael. I request only from Am Yisrael a korban. What does that show you? That shows you it's not about me, it's about you. The one problem, though, if you read the Midrash the way I just read it, as like a question and an answer, is a big issue. Because it implies that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not ask Michael to bring a korban. Yet, the Gemara in several places, there's a Gemara in Menachot, a Gemara in Chagiga, both make very clear mention that every single day, the angel, the Malach Michael, brings a korban to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What kind of korban is up for discussion? Tosfot, in one of his explanations, says it's an animal of fire that Michael brings up and offers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu every single day. So then how can you read the Midrash and say that, wouldn't I have asked Michael to bring the korban? You did ask Michael to bring the korban. So what kind of a point is HaKadosh Baruch Hu making over here? And the Malbim explains beautifully. He says, the concept of a korban is what? It's rectification. It's to go ahead and amend an error that was performed. So a person violates a certain sin accidentally. He comes to Beit HaMikdash to rectify, and there's really 2 elements that he needs to be mitaken, that he needs to fix. The first is the physical thing, the physical transgression. He violated with his body, with his physical being. But second, he violated with his neshama, with his spiritual, with his mindset, the esoteric violation of the spirituality, not just the physicality. Now the Kohen, he takes the Korban, he takes the animal of the Jew, and the Korban is brought to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and instead of HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishing the person directly, the body, technically speaking, the body and the neshama should be totally gone, should be chayav mitah, death penalty, and be erased from the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't want that. I want to do a favor, I want to do a kindness, and instead of the body of the human, I'll take the body of the animal in its place. And the Korban is brought by the Kohen as a remedy for the physical. But what's the remedy for the spiritual? What repairs the spiritual mistake that was performed? The Kohen is doing a physical action. So that a person himself has an obligation to view as if he was the Korban, as if his body was now dissected into its parts and taken and brought on top of the Mizbeach. And he has to inculcate and imagine that to himself and picture that that's supposed to be me, and his heart is supposed to be broken within, which is the sacrifice that the person brings and the remedy that he brings to himself in order to achieve that second element of the forgiveness. Now, how is that embodied? That's Michael. Michael takes the person emotions and he brings that, so to speak, as a sacrifice. The spiritual sacrifice that he brings to HaKadosh Baruch Hu resonates from within the nation, from our intent and our kavanot when we bring sacrifices. Now we look back, and the Marbim says, the real explanation of Midrash, it's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is asking a question. You think I need your korbanot? I would have asked Michael to bring the korban, but you did ask Michael. It says like this, no, it's a statement. I would not have asked Michael to bring a korban if all I cared about is the physical korban and the physical animal that is brought to me. If I have commanded Michael in the bringing of that korban, then it must be that I'm looking something past the physical. I'm looking for a different element, a different component, and that is the heart. And that is the main part of the korban. It is not the physical aspect that is brought in Beit HaMikdash. That's just the avenue that leads a person to the true korban. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the physical, that's not the ikar, that's not the priority, that's not what's important to me. I could have done that without Michael. I commanded Michael because I need the spiritual korban. That's what I need. And if that's the case, that means korbanot are very relevant to this very day. Because a korban true in the Beit HaMikdash, that's 100% true. We don't have that. And that physical form of atonement doesn't apply. But the spiritual form still does apply in full force. When a person comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, I sacrificed, I did, I'm trying my best, I'm working really hard, and it's difficult and it's stressful, but I'm pushing through for you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's the korban of Michael. That korban we pray every single day, 3 times a day in the tefillah. Ve'ishei Yisrael u'tfilatam. What Ishei Yisrael, what sacrifices do we want HaKadosh Baruch Hu to accept? The sacrifices that we do for the sake of the Ribono Shel Olam. So all of this is absolutely relevant, extremely relevant to our times. Now, it's not an easy thing. It's a very difficult thing for a person to work on himself. And truth of the matter is, one of the mitzvot of the korbanot is mentioned, vehifshitet ha'olah. You take the korban, and the first thing you have to do is you have to skin the animal. Before it is brought on top of the mizbeach, you skin the animal entirely, and then v'nitach oto lintachav, which means you have to cut it up into its parts, into its different limbs. Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, one time, when he was elderly, he was already in his 80s, he was an old man, and there was a Sheva Bochot of one of his grandchildren, or great-grandchildren. And they invited, of course, he was one of the Gedolei Ador, they invited him to speak at the Sheva Bochot. He gets up, and it was very difficult for him to even walk and to stand up, but he did. He got up and he managed to start speaking, and as he was speaking, he opened with a statement. He said, I am the greatest of the generation. I'm a wise man. I perfected my character traits. And he started praising himself. And the people there were very nervous, first of all, because they knew he was older and maybe he was starting to get senile. They were afraid and they were sure that something must have hit him. Like, why is he never would talk about himself. Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz is a tremendous Bal Musar. And now he's not just talking, he's talking about himself in a very high tone and how elevating himself. It's very bizarre, and they were embarrassed with what was going on. They just felt like he was probably getting older and something was happening to him. And he's explaining that everything, Baruch Hashem, I do try to do my best, but look, I'm not going to say I'm perfect. I also have my flaws, I also have my mistakes. And again, they're kind of like sitting there not knowing what to do. And he says, this is what people think of themselves. Every person thinks of himself, I'm not bad, I'm pretty good, I keep Shabbat, I keep Kashrut, I never had Taref, I make sure that I wear tefillin every single day. Overall, I'm pretty good. It's true, there are certain things, there's a few exceptions, I don't do so well. Those are the details. But the overall picture, I'm a good Jew. And that is actually the source, says Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, the source of Ga'ava. Hubris, a person who is arrogant, what does he say about himself? I'm pretty good. Overall, the overall picture is great. There are some mistakes. Says the Torah, Vayikra ha'olah. What is olah? A person's oleh, that means he's becoming arrogant. You have to bring and offer that sacrifice of the olah. How do you do it? First you have to divide. You look at the overall picture, that's exactly where ga'ava comes in. Look at the details. Pay attention. Now, let's focus. Tefillin, you said you're good at tefillin. You wear tefillin every day. Let me ask you, when was the last time you learned the halachot? Did you ever open up the Sefer Halachot about tefillin? Since your bar mitzvah, you're 70, 80 years old. Did you ever look at the halachot about bar mitzvah? By tefillin, after your bar mitzvah? Or did you ever learn the halachot of Shabbat properly? Did you actually sit down to analyze the halachot that you feel you're so perfect about that? And you made sure that when you go ahead and you perform those mitzvot, you have proper kavanah, and you're not just doing it by rote. And when you prayed, did you make sure that you actually focused, at least in the first bracha, exactly in the words? So when, of course, you look at the overall, yeah, I'm pretty good, I'm a good Jew. But then you start you start dissecting every element, and then you begin to notice there is no room to figure and to consider ourselves to be so great. We're not that great. There's a lot of different flaws and a lot of things that have to be worked on. As the saying once goes, if a person comes on time to tefillah, he's actually late to the tefillah. Because if you came on time, then when did you have time to put on the tefillin? In order to actually come on time, you have to come a few minutes early. Did you do that? How can you say you're perfect? When a person begins to actually stop and think for several minutes about what he actually is doing, not just viewing overall pictures, he'll notice from beginning to end all the different errors and repairs that need to be done. And then, of course, there's no room for ga'ava. How can you feel greater than anybody else when you have all these flaws yourselves that need to be worked on? But in truth, it's very difficult. And when a person does do that, and he starts thinking to himself, then it kind of leads to despair. Where am I going to start? How am I going to finish? There's just so much to work on. There's so much problems and what am I going to do? Am I going to focus on tefillin? Am I going to focus on Shabbat? Well, if I have to focus on everything, then I won't do anything. I can't just go ahead and 180 and become a different person. So a person tends, when he actually gets serious, he tends to give up. And he doesn't want to do because I can't handle it. And the Torah provides us with a solution to that problem too. Because the Pasuk says, when a person commits one of these sins, then he should confess that which he sinned about. Rambam explains, if a person committed a crime that is worthy of the penalty of bringing a korban asham, a guilty offering, then he has to confess for that sin. If he had some other sin, then he has to confess for that specific sin. Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik says, we see a powerful point over here. It's unbelievable. Because that means that you don't have to confess for everything at once. When we talk about tshuva, Rosh Hashanah comes really every day of the year. But Rosh Hashanah comes, people get in the mood of tshuva, and they say to themselves, okay, I'm going to be a much better person, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix that, I'm going to fix this. And if he doesn't do that, he feels like he's not doing anything. I'm not repairing myself. I'm not advancing the ball and the cause. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Zev, no, take it slowly. If you repair one thing, then you're doing a great job. You don't have to repair everything. Tshuva is not an all or nothing mission. If you take one step, you're doing what you should be doing. The halakha says you're not mitvadeh. When you bring that korban, you don't say, all my sins, I ask for forgiveness and I'm doing an atonement for all this sin. No, for this sin, for this element, you take it one step at a time. And you don't look at the whole picture, you look at one thing, and that is the element that brings us to tshuva. Like the Stipler, he would say, Gemara, famous Gemara, Masechet Brachot, that Rabbi Yochanan, he came to visit Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat. And he sees him, Rabbi Elazar was in this house, it was room more like, and it was pitch black, it was night, and he didn't have money for candles. He didn't have money to eat. The Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit says that Rabbi Elazar was so poor, he didn't have what to eat. When he finally did eat something, he had only like this garlic, he ate it and he fainted because he mamash, nothing to eat. So Rabbi Yochanan sees Rabbi Elazar in this state, no lights, no anything. It says that Rabbi Yochanan rolled up his sleeve and his arm revealed a radiance, like a shining light that lit up the whole room. So Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar began to cry. And Rabbi Yochanan starts wondering, why is Rabbi Elazar crying? There could be several reasons. He says, are you crying because of the Torah that you weren't able to learn? And the Mefarshim explain, if you look at the Sfat Emet, he says, what do you mean the Torah that he wasn't able to afshat? That's the language of the Gemara, that you weren't able to extrapolate. He brings in, because we know that when Rish Lakish, he had a very famous chavuta with, Rabbi Yochanan had a famous chavuta with Rish Lakish. And they were great buddies. And they would learn together for long periods of time. Rabbi Yochanan was actually the one to get Rish Lakish to become religious in the first place. And what happened? One day they got into a discussion. Rabbi Yochanan got upset at Rish Lakish. And the anger of a tzaddik like Rabbi Yochanan caused the death of Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish died because in some way he upset Rabbi Yochanan. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like when you upset the tzaddikim, like as great as Rabbi Yochanan, and Rish Lakish died. Now what happened? Rabbi Yochanan, it was inadvertent in a certain way. He didn't mean to go ahead and do that, but the truth of the matter is he lost out because he lost his main chavuta. He didn't have who to learn with. There was no one to replace Rish Lakish until Rabbi Elazar came. Rabbi Elazar entered the scene, and Rabbi Yochanan began learning with him because he was a great Talmid Chacham. Rabbi Elazar, anytime Rabbi Yochanan would say a halakha, he would say some sort of teaching, Rabbi Elazar would say, I'll bring you 24 proofs to your point. And that would actually not make Rabbi Yochanan happy. He said, I miss Rish Lakish. He began tearing his garments again and saying how much he misses Rish Lakish. Because whenever I would say halakha, Rish Lakish would ask me 12 questions on my halakha, and from that it would lead to massive discussions and new insights in Torah. And now I have Rabbi Elazar and he's reinforcing my points. You think I need reinforcements to my point? I know my points are strong. I don't need reinforcements. I need questions. And he said that to Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, he was a great man, he was a holy man, but the skills that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him are the skills he gave him. So he had nothing that he could do to become Rish Lakish. So Rabbi Elazar could have potentially been very saddened. Because look, my Torah is not able to increase the Torah. I'm good at supporting. I'm not good at bringing new insights to ask questions and to delve into deeper ideas. So Rabbi Yochanan anticipated that maybe that's why Rabbi Elazar was crying. And he said back, if that's the case, if it's the Torah that you weren't afshat, that you didn't spread, that you didn't extrapolate, we know we have a saying that whether one learns a lot of Torah, he amasses a lot of knowledge or a little bit of knowledge, he works hard, then I don't care. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, as long as he works his hardest, then I'm for him. I'm happy with what he's doing, and as long as he is l'shem shamayim, he's for the sake of God, it doesn't matter the quantity that he actually learned. So don't be afraid, Rabbi Elazar. And if it's not because of the Torah, it's because maybe you're so impoverished, you don't have anything to eat, you don't have anything in the world, you have nothing, lo kol adam zocher lishne shulchanot. Least be happy. Not every person merits both olam hazeh this world and Olam Haba. You should be happy, at least you're the lucky members of Am Yisrael that's able to sit and learn Torah. You're in the Beit Midrash, so you don't have Parnasah, at least you have the Beit Midrash. And he says, and if it's because of the fact that you don't have children, this is the bone of my 10th son that I lost. So are you better off, are you worse off, I should say, than what I am? Says Rabbi Yochanan. Are you worse off than me? Now, first of all, you just have to stop and think about how great of a man Rabbi Yochanan was. Because if you look at the Geonim, right, they didn't just lose his 10th son. It was an unusual, torturous death. There was a big pot that was boiling water in there, and his son fell into it. And all of his skin just totally burnt up. And the only thing that was left was just the bones. So he took the small finger bone of his son, which doesn't contract tum'ah. It was less than a certain shiur. And why did he keep it? Only for the sake of comforting others. You think about that. That's an unbelievable lesson. Who would think, who would even have it cross their minds that when they have a death of a child, that he's going to use a part of the body of the child in order to comfort and console other individuals? That's not just the thought of Rabbi Yochanan, the actions of Rabbi Yochanan, that he was able to go ahead and to think in that direction and to do that. He consoles Rabbi Elazar with his own life story. And then Rabbi Elazar continues to cry. And Rabbi Yochanan realizes that there is something wrong, and he says, Chavivin alecha yesurin. Do you enjoy the affliction and the suffering that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing upon you? And Rabbi Elazar responds, and he says, Lo hen velo scharan. I'm not interested, not in the suffering, and not in the reward of the suffering. And Rabbi Yochanan says, give me your hand. He takes his hand and he heals him. From the difficult stresses and the problems of the sickness that he was currently in. Now the Stipler asked the basic question, why don't you just cut to the chase? Cut to the chase. You see the man sick. He's lying in bed. Maybe he's even dying. Why don't you just ask him the question straight? Just say, do you want Yisurim? Okay, let's get rid of them. Says the Stipler, he didn't just ask that question because he would have known what Rabbi Elazar would have responded. If he would have said, do you want me to get rid of those sufferings, of those Yisurin? Rabbi Elazar said, no, I'd rather just die. I have so many issues I have to deal with. Forget about it. Let the course of life and nature take its toll, and let's just get rid of me already. Like he turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Gemara in Ta'anit says that he had the same type of a mentality, that his life was so difficult, he just said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just take me. Rabbi Yochanan understood that. He didn't start, let me heal you, let me take away those Yisurin. First he addressed the issues at hand. He said, if this is your problem, let me address that. If you have a problem with the Torah, if you have a problem with your children, if you have a problem with your Parnasah, let me solve each problem at a time. Now we could go ahead and dissect this, because otherwise it's a big mumbo jumbo and Rabbi Elazar would have just given up. So what do we learn from here? If a person wants to stay on the course, he has to take it one step at a time. You can't just get confused. You can't just say, I have too many problems, forget it. No, let's take it one at a time. One problem, okay, solved. Dealt with that. Now let's move on to the next. Venitach oto lintachav. Break it down into bite-sized pieces, and now you could go ahead and you could conquer the world one bit at a time. That's an important lesson when it comes to not giving up and continuing in our ways. We have a story from the Ohev Yisrael. This is one of the Hasidic Rebbes, and he says that he remembers his previous reincarnation and other reincarnations that he had. He remembers all of them vividly. So they asked him, give us an example. And he said, let me give you one example. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, I remember vividly I was around. And they used to call me Rabbi Zerach. And they would not just use that term lightly. Rabbi Zerach was because people considered me to be a tzaddik, a very righteous man, and everything was great. So they said, well, if you were so righteous, then how come after Rabbi Zerach passed away, you had to come back in a Gilgul again? So he said, that's a good question. I'll tell you. Because I was Mechalel Shabbat once in my life, Bishogeg. It was accidental. It was inadvertently, but I was mechaleh Shabbat. I violated, I desecrated the Shabbat, and I had to come back. So then they asked him another question. They said, wait a second, but you said that you were alive in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. So when a person's mechaleh Shabbat, in shogeg, unintentionally, in the time of Beit HaMikdash, you bring a korban. He says, exactly, excellent, I did bring a korban. I went all the way to Yerushalayim. And as I approached, of course, they have the stores where you can buy the animal. And I went to the person who sells the animals, and I said, I'm looking for a se'irat izim, which is a female goat. And the store owner says, well, why are you looking for the female? A korban shilamim, which is an offering that you bring for HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a thank you, you could bring a male. Oh, even better, a male korban. He says, no, I need a female specifically, because I'm not offering a korban shilamim. I'm bringing a korban chatat. And korban chatat, which is for sins, has to be a female goat. He says, V'bzerach, korban chatat, it's beneath your dignity. You did an avirah? How could it be? No, Rabbi Zerach. He says, looks down, he's embarrassed. What can I say? It was a korban chatat, I have to bring a female. So he starts purchasing the female, he takes it up, and he starts going with to Yerushalayim. Now, you can imagine how he's feeling. He's bringing a female. Who else is bringing females? Only the people that did sins, that aren't able to bring the males, they're bringing the females. So he's walking to the Beit HaMikdash with his female goat, and he knows that people are just looking at him, and Rabbi Zerach committed the Avirah, and people are turning to him. He approaches the area of Beit HaMikdash. Right as he's about to enter, the she-goat, she becomes afraid. There was too many people, there was a whole commotion. She runs away, escapes to the outside. And now, oy vavoy, Rabbi Zerach, he's chasing after the goat, and he's looking, and she's running away, and she's turning into alleyways, and he's screaming, my goat, my she-goat, my she-goat, and people are looking at him, and they're noticing, and he says, did you see my she-goat? Did you see it? And people understand and are picking up, and he's totally embarrassed that he has to go ahead and running after his korban, until he finally finds it, and then he heads back. And people are saying, no, you found your korban. Oh, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu find forgiveness in Be'ezrat Hashem for your Avirah. And the people are already wishing him. And now the whole town basically knows. And by the time he reaches the Kohen, his Ufnei Haman Chafu already. His whole face turned white. Now he comes to the Kohen. The Kohen looks at him and says, oh, what will it be, a korban shilamim? He says, no, it's a korban chatat. And his face is already depressed. I have to bring a korban chatat, Rabbi Zerach. I can't believe you chatat. How is that even possible? And finally, he brings the korban in Beit HaMikdash. That's what the korban was, and I have a vivid recollection of this happening in my previous Gilgul, previous reincarnation. So then the students asked, if you went through all that trouble and all that difficulty and stress just to bring the korban, why are you here now? You should have had that forgiveness. And then the Ohev Yisrael turns to them, he says, and you have no idea what it means to be Mechaleh Shabbat afilu b'shogeg. That's how serious the offense is. That's serious. That a person must realize, it's not just an unintentional sin. What's an unintentional sin? If you stop and you think about it, there's two things that are behind, there's two motivating factors, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes it very seriously. The Korban Shogeg is not a joke, it's not a small matter. Number one is the point that the Ben Yehoyada makes. He brings out from a story. There were these two merchants, they were traveling by sea. And they were businessmen. They were traveling to a far out country outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the sea, the ship that was in the sea began sinking and turning, twisting and turning until, Baruch Hashem, they managed to survive, reach land, but it was nowhere near where they were planning on going. Actually, it was a Christian area, territory, and at those times the Christians were very severe. It was either death or exile. They were very strict with Jews or people of any other religion, and it would be death by the sword. So you had these two Jews, and they were traveling, they were starving, literally to death. They had to find a place to eat. It was already in the situation of pikuach nefesh. They had to eat no matter what. If it's kasher, not kasher, it doesn't really matter anymore. Christians, where are you going to find kasher anyways? And they're like, what are we supposed to do? We have to eat. It's pikuach nefesh, we haven't eaten for 4 days. So each one of them goes into a person's home and asks for food. They pretend like they're also trying to be the best Christians they could possibly be. And they go in. So guy number one, he enters a person's house and he eats, and he's not happy with what he's doing, but he knows he has no choice. He eats, he says in his mind, this is totally taref, I'll try to eat as little as possible. Halfway through the meal, the man notices him, the Baal Habayit, the owner of the house, and he says, you are a Jew. And let me tell you, you probably think that the food that you're eating is not kasher. And then he goes to where the animal was, and he shows the head of the animal. He says, look, this animal was slaughtered. You're eating kasher, because I'm also a Jew. And I just pretend to be a Christian so they don't kill me, but you're eating kasher. Guy number two, he also goes to a person's home, and he eats, and none of that happens. They meet each other after a few days. They meet each other, they head back into their land, and as they talk to each other, he says, you don't imagine what even happened to me. I went to this person's house, I was sure he was a Christian, what's the likelihood? I get a Jew and he gives me all kasher. And guy number two hears this, really? I'm telling you, I know for a fact, I ate taref. Not just taref, basar b'chalav, all the prohibitions. But I had no choice, what am I supposed to do? That's all there was. And he felt terrible. He says, this guy, this Jew, he, Baruch Hashem, only ate kasher, and why did I lose out that I had to eat taref? So they went to the Rav when they arrived back in their city. And the Rav starts asking a whole slew of questions, interrogates, why would this happen, why not? It finds out, after a few questions, he points to a certain area in this person's life when he was much, much younger. And he says, listen, did you ever eat food that was not kasher intentionally? Did it ever happen in your life? And he says, no, a long time ago, when I was much younger, I had these friends that they were not Jewish, and they had wine that was yain nesich. It was goyim, and their wine is, of course, asur to Jews. And they had this sandwich that looked really, really good. And I decided that I'll take a bite out of the sandwich and I'll drink a little bit of the wine, just because I had to do it. And then after I ate it, I was like, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should forgive me for what I did. So the Rav looks at him, he says, that's the answer to your question. If one time you were willing to eat food that was not kasher intentionally, then it's very logical, it's quite logical that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not try to save you. And that other person, who his whole life was careful to not eat kasher, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he made sure to protect him. That's the difference. Point being, when a person commits a violation b'shogeg, shogeg is in quotations, there must be something that he was willing to do b'mezid, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would bring about the unintentional. To give an example, a person, when he sleeps, how many nights in a person's life does he sleep? I don't know, do the math, 10,000, 20, I don't know, 50,000 nights in a person's life, he sleeps. How many times does a person fall off his bed when he sleeps? 0. Never. How come? How come a person never falls off his bed when he goes to sleep? He's not even conscious. He's not even paying attention. Because he was pre-programmed. He understands that if he falls off, it's going to hurt. And he makes sure that every single night of his life, he's not going to fall off that bed, even though he's not conscious of what he's doing. He's sleeping. What's the explanation? Because when something is meaningful to you, you make sure that you don't violate it. The concept of violating b'shogeg is definitively not caring enough about the prohibition. If you cared enough, you would never have had a violation b'shogeg. That is the essence of why it is so strict, why HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes so severely just for a shogeg. Imagine what a mezid would mean. The Gaon Mivina puts it in different terms. The famous Mishnah, the Mishnah says that Ar kochacha ata notzar, against your will you are conceived, a human being. Ve'ar kochacha ata nolad, and you are born against your will. No one asks you for coming down to this world. No one wanted your request or your consent. Ar kochacha ata chai, and you live against your will. Ve'ar kochacha ata met, and against your will you die. Ve'ar kochacha ata atidi din v'cheshbon, and against your will you will have to render judgment in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So they asked the Gaon Mivina, this is contradictory. if I don't choose to come to this world? I don't choose to live in this world. I have to live in the world. Why should I have to be judged for my actions? I never chose this. I was placed in here. Why should I be held guilty? And the Gaon answered beautifully. He said, there's a Gemara in Masechet Baba Batra that talks about when you have two people that have their fields bordering each other. So you have Reuven. Reuven has his field inside the field of Shimon. So Shimon has the outside field, and Reuven's field is inside Shimon's field. And let's say Shimon, who's on the outside, he decides he's going to build a fence around the inside area surrounding Reuven. So he builds 3 walls to surround Reuven. He's allowed to build a fence between his property and Reuven, but only on 3 sides he does it. Does Reuven have to pay for it? So no. Reuven could say, A, I didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for the walls. You put it up. You didn't ask me. I don't want them. Take it. And B, you didn't even do a good job. You only put 3 walls. At least put up a 4th wall. So Reuven has 2 points here. But once Reuven, let's say Reuven was to go ahead and take that 4th side and build a fence on that 4th side. You know what now Reuven just did to himself? He becomes obligated on the other 3 walls to join, to partner up and to pay up to Shimon for the other 3 walls. Why? Because you revealed your intent that you enjoy and want these walls. By building that 4th wall, you are enjoying those first 3 walls, you have to end up paying for it. Says the Gaon Mivina, that's exactly what's happening in the Mishnah. Yes, al kochacha ata notzar, al kochacha ata nolad, al kochacha ata chai. You have 3 walls. Against your will, you were conceived, you're born, and you live against your will. Fine. But then, there's al kochacha ata mit. Then a person comes into this world, and he's enjoying, he has his cell phone, he has his internet, his newspapers, wonderful, delicious food, beautiful car, beautiful home. He's enjoying this world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't want to leave the world. Al kochacha ata mit. Because of the al kochacha ata mit, al kochacha ata atid yiden din v'cheshbon. Therefore, because you've enjoyed, you've shown me that you want to stay in the world, you like the world, you enjoy this world, then you will have to go ahead and suffer the consequences for the averot that were performed in such a world that you decided that you want to live in. How does that apply to us as well? The explanation being that if a person goes ahead, he can make an argument. Maybe I don't need to be in this world. I don't want to be in this world. But you enjoy from the world. You benefit from the world. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you make sure that you don't go ahead and you don't do the averot that will hold you accountable. When you do that shogeg, when you have that shogeg, there must have been something that was mezid, that you would have done anyways. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that shogeg, you can go ahead and get punished for as well. The final point that I'd want to mention is actually in the beginning of the Parashat, where the first word, Vayikra el Moshe. As famous Baal HaTurim, the small aleph, in the very beginning of Vayikra, the last aleph is, the first aleph is of the first word is small, Vayikra. And the reason for that being is because Moshe Rabbeinu was hesitant. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to write Vayikra. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to write Vayikar, which means that he encountered. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of accidentally, it happened that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe, because he didn't want to write that HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you have to go ahead and do it. So they made a compromise. It's going to be a small aleph, not a big aleph, a tiny aleph. That's the lesson over here. So one of the questions that the Shach asks, he says, I don't understand. Doesn't make sense. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't want the aleph. What do you mean you don't want the aleph? Think about all a lot of these seminaries, they try to get people to become religious, so they show them all these Torah codes. 55 letters apart, 100 letters apart. There's so many deep secrets to every single letter of the Torah. And the whole thing could be messed up. If you take out that aleph, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants there to be aleph. Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, I want to take it out so people don't know. Let me take out the aleph. There's so much you could learn from that aleph being there. Moshe Rabbeinu, you're willing to give up an aleph that belongs in the Torah? How could you say that? Says the Shach, Rav Shach. And he answers and he says, Moshe Rabbeinu understood all that was at stake if you were to lose that aleph. And Moshe Rabbeinu said the calculation of anava, of teaching the Jews humility, is worth more than all the lessons that could be learned from an aleph. even the Aleph of the Torah. It's worth more, the Anava lesson that could be taken from that. So says the Rav Shach, if that's the case, so then that's a good point. You should take out the Aleph entirely. So why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say, no, we're going to leave the Aleph? Why leave the Aleph? You have a wonderful lesson of Anava. Says Rav Shach, because there's an even greater lesson to be learned. And that's emunah. Belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Belief that everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is calculated and is meticulous, tailor-made for the person. If it would have written Vayikra means it was a coincidence. No. There's no such thing as coincidence when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's a greater lesson than Anava. That's a much more important lesson to be learned than Anava. So teach the Anava. But even more important, teach the Emunah. When it comes to the Reshaim, like Bil'am, it says Vayikra. It says that it was coincidental. You want to know why? Because the Reshaim, they're not conducted with divine providence. A person who's a Rasha, like the Chovot HaLevavot writes, a person who doesn't trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he doesn't believe in the divine providence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He goes in his ways and he does his own things without HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the picture. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds in kind and he says, you don't think I'm in the picture? I'm not going to be in the picture for you. You're going to go ahead and run based on the laws of nature, based on the course of events. I'm not going to come and intervene on your behalf to save you because you don't care for me. So says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, for the Reshaim it's Vayikra. But you, Moshe, no, it has to be Vayikra. Everything was done and is done exactly the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. There are no coincidences. There are no accidents. That is the ultimate bitachon. We come to this month of Nisan. Be'ezrat Hashem, haba alenu letovah, this Shabbat and the Sunday. And the month of Nisan is the month of Emunah. The month of believing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the show. And this is a lesson that we have to inculcate in ourselves. That it's a Vayikra and not Vayikra. That is an element of the Torah that is worth and worthy of focusing on during this time. Be'ezrat Hashem, we should have this spiritual greatness and be zochet to the building of Beit HaMikdash. B'mera ve'amenu v'nomar amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.